Poor young girl let a strange man and his son stay for one night, unaware he's a millionaire CEO who. A bitter wind swept through the narrow paths of a forgotten village as the sky darkened with thick clouds. The storm had been brewing all day, and by nightfall, the heavens opened, drenching the small homes scattered along the hills. At the farthest edge stood a crumbling stone cottage, barely held together by time and memory. Inside, Elara moved quickly, gathering what few herbs and vegetables she could from her tiny garden before the rain swallowed the last of the light. She was no stranger to storms, life had given her many. Orphaned at a young age and raised by her grandmother, Elara had learned to survive on little. After her grandmother's passing, the cottage became her only inheritance, a relic of love and loss. The roof leaked, the cupboards were nearly bare, and the electricity had been cut off weeks ago. Still, Elara met each day with quiet resilience. She earned meager coins selling herbs in town and mending clothes for the village children. Bitterness had knocked, but she never answered. That evening, lightning split the sky, and thunder growled like a beast. Elara sat near the dim fire, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, when a sudden knock shattered the stillness. Startled, she froze. No one visited at this hour, especially not during such a storm. She opened the door cautiously, and standing there in the downpour was a man, soaked to the bone, holding a small boy wrapped in a damp coat. The man's eyes were calm, yet tired. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice steady but humble. "We've been walking for hours. Could we rest here for the night?" Elara's first instinct was caution. She was alone, vulnerable, and he was a stranger. But as she looked down at the boy nestled in the man's arms, she saw no danger, only exhaustion. The child, probably 6 or 7, blinked up at her with wide, pleading eyes. She stepped aside without a word, silently beckoning them in. The man introduced himself simply as Nathan. He didn't offer details, and Elara didn't ask. The boy, Jamie, quickly warmed to her, laughing at her mismatched socks and asking if he could help stir the pot of vegetable soup simmering over the fire. They shared the meal in peaceful silence, broken only by Jamie's chatter. He told her about his love for stars, how he wanted to be an astronaut, and how his mother used to sing to him, until she left with the angels. Nathan winced at the mention, but said nothing. That night, Elara laid out spare blankets by the hearth. The three of them sat near the fire, its soft glow casting long shadows on the walls. Jamie fell asleep first, curled against his father. Elara watched them for a moment, wondering who they truly were, what had led them to her door in the middle of such a storm. But she didn't press. Instead, she offered Nathan more soup and told him he could stay as long as he needed. He looked at her then, really looked. "Thank you," he said softly. Most people would have closed the door. Elara simply shrugged. "Most people haven't been hungry," she replied. Sleep came slowly that night. The storm outside howled, but inside the cottage, there was a fragile warmth, a fleeting sense of connection, like two worlds colliding in the quiet. By morning, the skies had cleared, leaving the earth glistening with dew. Nathan and Jamie were up early, preparing to leave. Nathan declined her offer of breakfast, though Jamie gave her a quick hug and promised to come back one day. As they stepped outside, Nathan paused. "You've given more than you know," he said, handing her a note wrapped around a small stone. Before she could reply, they were gone. Inside, Elara unfolded the note. It was simple: "Thank you for seeing us when no one else did. You may have saved more than just one night." She kept that note tucked between pages of an old journal, unaware that this one act of kindness would ripple far beyond her little cottage. She didn't know the man she helped was one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. On a rare escape from his public life, hoping to remind himself what mattered. She didn't know that, days later, he would return. That cameras would follow him. That he would invest in her village, transform lives, and announce a new community center, named after the very woman who gave him shelter when he had none. And she certainly didn't know that in opening her door to a stranger, she had, without realizing it, opened a door to her own new beginning. The morning sun filtered softly through the cracked curtains of Elara's cottage, casting warm streaks of gold across the floor. The storm had passed, leaving behind a serene stillness that clung to the village. The scent of damp earth and wood smoke lingered in the air. Elara stirred a small pot over the fire as the room remained hushed. Nathan and his young son, Jamie, were already gathering their things quietly. There was no ceremony, just the subtle shuffle of belongings being packed and the silent understanding that it was time for them to go. Elara moved with quiet purpose, wrapping the last of her bread in a cloth and pressing a few worn coins into Nathan's palm. "Take this," she said gently. "For the boy." Nathan hesitated, looking down at the gift she could barely afford to give. His eyes held something she couldn't quite decipher, maybe it was gratitude, or maybe disbelief. He accepted the offering with a nod. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of something unspoken. Then, with Jamie clutching his hand, he stepped out into the morning light and disappeared down the winding path. Days passed. Life returned to its ordinary rhythm. Elara rose early, gathered herbs from the hills, and made the long walk into town to sell what little she had. She fixed the holes in her roof with discarded scraps, strengthened her cottage walls with nails rusted by age and rain, and managed to make do, as she always had. Her kindness had been freely given, never once with expectation. The memory of the quiet man and his cheerful boy lingered, but she spoke of them to no one. They had entered her life like shadows in a storm, there for a moment, gone with the dawn. Then, everything changed. It began with the low, unfamiliar rumble of engines rolling into the heart of the village. Elara was setting out jars of wild honey at her stall when the noise reached her. It grew louder until the market square fell into confused silence. Heads turned. Children stopped playing. Even the elders paused, eyebrows raised. A sleek procession of luxury SUVs swept through the narrow road, polished to perfection, foreign in every way to their rural world. Villagers gathered, drawn by curiosity. From the lead vehicle, sharply dressed security personnel stepped out, scanning the area with practiced efficiency. Something big was happening, something none of them had expected. Then the door of the central vehicle opened. Elara watched in stunned silence as a familiar figure stepped into view. It was him, Nathan. But he was no longer the quiet, rain-drenched man she had sheltered days ago. He now wore a crisp designer suit, his posture straight, his presence commanding. There was no mistaking him now. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "That's Nathan Cross," someone whispered. "The CEO, the billionaire?" Reporters pushed forward with cameras and microphones, flashing bulbs, and a storm of questions. Nathan ignored them all. His eyes scanned the square until they landed on Elara, standing behind her humble market stall. And then, he walked toward her. Elara didn't move. Her heart pounded. It was as if time had splintered. Two worlds colliding in the space between footsteps. When he reached her, he took her hand gently in both of his, ignoring the cameras and onlookers. "I was a stranger," he said, his voice strong now, public, yet still touched with the softness she remembered. "And you welcomed me into your home without knowing who I was. You fed me and my son when you had so little yourself." Elara felt her cheeks flush as murmurs echoed around her. "I didn't forget," Nathan continued. "And I never will." He turned to the gathered press, raising his voice slightly. "This village reminded me of what matters. And this woman reminded me of what it means to care." Reporters jotted notes. Photographers leaned closer. Nathan raised a hand to gesture toward the distant cottage nestled at the edge of the village. "Today, I'm proud to announce a long-term investment into this community. We will provide resources, training programs, and support for every family who calls this place home." Then, returning his gaze to Elara, he added, "And it all begins with her." A screen was rolled out beside them, displaying the rendering of a beautiful new structure. Nathan continued, "Elara's home will be renovated and transformed into a training center for underprivileged women across the region. It will offer education, skills development, and a safe place to begin again. It will be called the Hartwell Center, in honor of the heart that opened its doors when no one else would. Elara stood frozen, overwhelmed by the whirlwind around her. What began as a quiet act of kindness had become the foundation for a future she never imagined. She didn't ask for praise, and she didn't seek reward. She had simply opened her door to someone in need. And now, that door had opened her life to something far greater. Weeks had passed since the day a fleet of luxury SUVs rolled into the village square, since Elara's quiet world was turned inside out. The once forgotten town now buzzed with new life, like spring had bloomed out of a long winter. And there, in the very heart of it all, stood a brand new structure gleaming with fresh paint, tall windows, and hope built into its very foundation. The sign above the entrance read, Elara House of Hope. Elara stood before it, blinking against the morning sun, dressed in a crisp navy blue blouse and well-fitted slacks. Clothes she wasn't used to, gifted by Nathan's team when they appointed her as project director. She still caught herself touching the sleeve as if to make sure this wasn't a dream. She no longer smelled of earth and smoke but wore light perfume and carried a notebook everywhere, filled with plans and names of women who had come to believe in the impossible. Inside the center, the rooms were alive with energy. Women from nearby towns sat in classes learning everything from basic coding to sewing and small business planning. Some held babies on their laps as they took notes. Others shared laughter over coffee in the lounge area, exchanging stories of hardship now slowly softening into hope. Jamie darted between classrooms, waving colored drawings in one hand and an unfinished sandwich in the other. He called Elara Auntie now, and it warmed her heart every time. He'd taken to the center as if he had grown up inside its walls. The staff adored him, and she adored him even more. Nathan visited often, though never with fanfare. He came dressed simply, no suits, no entourage, only a laptop and a quiet eagerness to listen. He sat in on meetings, reviewed proposals, and spent afternoons walking the grounds with Elara, talking about what more they could do. His presence didn't overshadow the project, it illuminated it. And the village? It began to bloom. A bakery opened next door, its window always fogged with steam from warm loaves and sweet rolls. The smell of fresh bread wafted into the center, comforting and familiar. Across the street, a small school received new books and desks. Children who once wandered aimlessly now skipped off each morning with satchels and lessons to recite. People who had once pitied Elara as the poor girl in the broken cottage now turned to her with admiration, even gratitude. She had become more than a face in the crowd. She had become the pulse of a transformation, a movement seated in kindness and watered by faith. But Elara hadn't done it for recognition. Her joy didn't come from the applause or the titles. It came from the quiet moments, when a young woman cried after fixing her first broken sewing machine, or when a mother whispered, "You gave me my dignity back." One evening, as the sky blushed with fading gold, Elara and Nathan sat beneath the tall sycamore tree that stood near the edge of the property. It was the same tree where she had first met him, drenched and weary, clutching Jamie's tiny hand, asking for a place to stay. The breeze was soft. Crickets began to sing. Jamie's laughter echoed faintly from the center's hallway. Nathan turned toward her, his expression thoughtful and tender. He no longer looked like the quiet stranger at her door, nor the billionaire in a tailored suit. He looked like a man shaped by the journey they had taken together. "You didn't just change our night," he said quietly. "You changed our lives." Elara smiled, her gaze drifting to the center's glowing windows. Inside, shadows moved, dreamers chasing second chances. "I didn't do it alone," she replied. Nathan shook his head slowly. "You were the beginning. You opened the door. The rest of us just walked through it." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the peace settle around them like a soft blanket. The stars blinked awake overhead, and Elara tilted her head back to look at them. A few months ago, she had watched those same stars from a dark, crumbling cottage, not knowing if she'd eat the next day, not expecting anything more than survival. Now, she was building futures. She remembered how it all began. Not with grand gestures or riches, but with a knock in the rain and a decision to say yes. Just one simple act of kindness. A warm tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Because in that moment, beneath the stars and beside the man whose life she'd unknowingly changed, Elara finally believed it. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness really do open the door to miracles.